So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. We are into lecture number 12. As discussed in the earlier lecture, I was talking about Atma Jnana, that is knowing the self. And in the same connection, I also talked about maintaining better emotional balance. Somebody who knows herself or himself is somebody who has a more stable self, which is not affected so much by the external agencies or happenings, and shows a better balanced approach during the period of crisis. So, in the same connection, I will be talking about how do we understand bhava, that is emotions, and what do we do to maintain an emotional balance. This is very important because if you call yourself intellectually sound, capable of taking an informed decision, maintaining emotional balance or controlling your emotions when it matters the most during the time of crisis is very crucial. So, why emotions matter? The crisis of the contemporary mind. Let us talk about it. We inhabit an age in which emotional life has become both hyper visible and profoundly unprocessed. We are feeling the emotional crisis more than ever during our contemporary period, and this is because of so many factors. Where social media converts outrage into spectacle, workplaces normalize chronic stress as ambition, relationships increasingly unfold through speed and insecurity, and students often experience anxiety not as an occasional disturbance, but as a constant background atmosphere. So, we are living in a highly charged atmosphere where productivity sometimes takes its toll on our emotional well-being, mental well-being as well. Indian thought offers a remarkably deep philosophical entry into the condition. Emotions are not accidental disturbances, not merely fleeting sensations, they are modulations of consciousness that shape perception, judgment, memory, speech and action. So, we have a more profound understanding and exploration of emotions. Udharedatmanatmanam natmanam vasadayet atmaiva hayatmano bandhuratmaiva ripuratmanah. What does it mean? The verse offers a profound psychology of emotional life. The same mind that can elevate the self through reflection, restraint and clarity can also become the source of self defeat through rumination, over identification, fear loops and reactive thinking. So, it is very important to understand how to channelize it in the right direction. So, the question arises, what do we mean by bhava, the Indian idea of emotion? The Sanskrit term bhava is far richer, more nuanced and philosophically fertile than the modern English word emotion. While emotion often suggests an internal feeling, state or a psychological reaction, bhava in Indian philosophy, aesthetics and spiritual psychology signifies something far more expansive, an inner state, affective disposition, mode of becoming, tonal orientation of consciousness and the lived movement through which feeling takes form in experience. विभावा अनुभाव विचारी संजोगा दृश निष्पत्ति. What does that mean? It philosophically, profound, because it shows that feeling emerges through a relational structure. Vibhava, the determinant or trigger; anubhava, the expressive manifestation; vyabhichari bhava, that is fleeting auxiliary states that intensify the mood. So, they are all connected: bhava, vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava. Let us take some examples from Indian knowledge system. How Rama's grief turns emotion as the beginning of clarity. One of the most psychologically rich emotional episodes in Indian literature unfolds in the Aranyakand of Valmiki's Rāmāyaṇa, where Ram returns to the forest hut and discovers that Sita has been abducted. What follows is not the emotionally invulnerable response of a distant hero, but an intensely human moment of grief, disorientation, longing, and existential shock. Ram wanders through the forest asking trees, rivers, creepers, mountains, and animals whether they have seen Sita. Ha Site Lakshmaneti cha Vyaharana punah punah. Again and again he cried out, O Sita, O Lakshmana. The Ramayana does not equate greatness with emotional suppression. Instead, it presents grief as an authentic movement of consciousness that must first be acknowledged, expressed, and lived through. Rama's sorrow is not weakness, it is the natural affective response to love, loss, and relational rupture. So, when we talk about emotional balance, we are not talking about emotional barrenness. A man devoid of emotions is not better than a machine. So, man has to have emotions. Bhavas are central to our existence. But how we regulate them, how we express them, how we make use of them is certainly very, very crucial. Yet the deeper wisdom of the episode lies in the transformation that follows. Ram does not remain imprisoned in lamentation. A common man might lose oneself in such a loss, will never recover, but Maryada Purushottam Ram, he laments for a while, but then does not let that lamentation completely eclipse his reason. The movement of the narrative gradually converts grief into inquiry, inquiry into search, and search into purposeful action. Emotion therefore becomes the beginning of clarity rather than its negation. This is profoundly relevant to contemporary life. After personal betrayal, academic failure, loss of a loved one, or professional setbacks, many people either collapse into numbness or react impulsively. Emotional balance begins not when grief is denied, but when grief is gradually transformed into direction. So, friends, if you experience failure, distress, you do not allow yourself to be dictated by that. The strength of character lies in how you can bounce back, how you can reorganize yourself, how you can find yourself and show your character, fight it out. So, there is a concept in Indian knowledge system which we call Samatva. This Samatva is our Indian ideal of emotional balance. Among the most profound contributions of Indian thought to the philosophy of emotion is this very idea of Samatva, equanimity, inner proportion or effective steadiness. Samatva is the disciplined capacity to remain inwardly poised amid the inevitable dualities of life: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, success and failure, intimacy and rejection. It is not the absence of feeling, but the refusal to allow feeling to become tyrannical over consciousness. So, how you can discipline the capacity to remain balanced even if you are faced with the dualities of life or the most trying circumstances in life. Matra asparsastu kaunteya शीतोष्ण सुख दुख दा सुख दुख दा आगमापायिनो नित्यास्तांस्तितिक्षस्व भारत आगमापायिनो अनित्यांस्तांस्तितिक्षस्व भारत. Joy and sorrow, comfort and discomfort, excitement and disappointment, they arise through interaction with situations, people, outcomes and expectations. Because they are contingent, they are also transient. So, all these emotions are transient, they are not permanent, the contact born experiences. The central problem of contemporary emotional life lies not in the inevitability of fluctuating experiences, but in the tendency to convert temporary outcomes into stable identities. We lose a game and we believe we have lost the life. We need to understand it is just a game that has been lost. We can always bounce back and claim another game. So, when we start thinking that these contemporary outcomes are our real identities, we negate our stable identities. So that a failed interview becomes a judgment on the self, criticism is internalized as inadequacy, social media neglect is experienced as invisibility, and professional success is mistaken for the sole measure of worth. And mostly we make mistakes when we depend solely on these measures of self and the other. So, this is precisely where Samatva becomes a radical contemporary resource. It teaches that events may disturb the surface of life, but they need not destabilize the center of selfhood. Equanimity must not be mistaken for indifference, however. It does not mean passively accepting injustice, suppressing grief or becoming emotionally cold. Rather, it provides us that ability to bear with it and to make ourselves strong when it is needed. So, it means preserving clarity so that one may respond wisely instead of react impulsively. In leadership, this means measured decisions under stress. In relationships, it means hearing criticism without ego collapse. In mental health, it means refusing to let temporary emotional weather define permanent identity. Friends, if we learn this, obviously these temporary disturbances will not disturb us beyond a particular time frame. We will have ability to bounce back even from the worst of situations. If we talk about bhava in aesthetics, one of the most original and philosophically sophisticated contributions of Indian thought to emotional theory emerges through Rasa aesthetics, where emotions are not understood merely as private inner disturbances, but as cultivable, observable and transformable modes of awareness. Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra does not treat feeling as chaotic spontaneity, instead it offers a remarkably systematic architecture in which emotional life is analyzed into stable states, asthāyi bhava, transitory movements, sanchari bhava, and involuntary bodily responses, that is sattvic bhavas. Together these do not simply produce feeling, they generate the refined aesthetic experience known as Rasa, where emotion is realized, understood and transformed. Punascha bhavan vakshami asthāyi sanchari sattva jnana. Now again I shall explain the bhavas, those arising as stable states, transitory movements and sattvika involuntary expressions. So, Indian aesthetics recognizes that what we casually call an emotion is rarely singular. What appears as anger may contain wounded pride, fear of rejection, bodily fatigue, remembered humiliation and transient irritation. What appears as sadness may include loneliness, nostalgia, anticipatory loss and existential insecurity. By encountering emotions through literature, theatre, poetry, music and performance, the individual learns to observe feeling with aesthetic distance rather than being swallowed by immediacy. And this distance is not detachment in the sense of indifference, I again reiterate, it is not indifference, rather it is reflective intimacy without collapse. When we witness karuna, pathos or raudra, anger or veera, that is heroism, or santa, that is peace, in drama or poetry, we are trained to recognize the structure of those same emotions within ourselves. So, they teach us how to realize these emotions and how to make use of these emotions. There are 3 gunas and emotional states as per Indian philosophy. The Indian philosophy and psychology, they offer one of the most suitable frameworks for understanding fluctuating emotional life through the doctrine of the 3 gunas. These are Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. They are presented as metaphysical constituents of Prakriti, Prakriti that is nature. It explains emotional states in relation to the quality of consciousness and energetic orientation dominating a given moment. Within this triadic model, Sattva signifies luminosity, balance, clarity, compassion and reflective poise. It is the affective atmosphere in which insight, patience and ethical proportion become possible. Rajas by contrast is the principle of movement, propulsion, craving, restlessness, comparison, ambition and emotional overactivity. The problem arises when movement loses discernment, that is vivek, and becomes agitation, impulsivity or compulsive emotional escalation. Tamas, the third term, we talked about Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Now, Tamas represents heaviness, obscuration, inertia, withdrawal, numbness, confusion and psychic stagnation. It may appear as exhaustion, avoidance, procrastination, denial or even the emotional flatness that follows chronic overstimulation. Feelings do not arise in isolation, they are conditioned by the prevailing guna that colors consciousness. Who is governed by which virtue or which guna? This certainly takes us to medieval theory of humor, in which a particular prevalence of a humor used to determine the character, actions and reactions, including dispositions of a particular person. So, which emotion governs you may determine your character, your disposition, your actions and your reactions. So, this means that emotional disturbance is not merely my emotion, but part of a larger ecology involving thought patterns, habits, environment, diet, sleep, relational climate and social structures. This becomes strikingly relevant in contemporary life. Much of modern culture is structurally Rajasic, like productivity obsession, constant notifications, fear of missing out, etc. So, life is always about movement, and sometimes this movement loses its direction as well. At the same time, the exhaustion produced by this acceleration often collapses into tamasic after effects. So, modern life is governed by these two gunas, rajas and tamas. It allows us to see that modern emotional suffering is often not simply personal weakness, but a symptom of the energetic structures within which life is organized. One is never allowed the luxury of thinking, meditation and maintaining peace of mind. Now, fear, anxiety and uncertainty, they have become part of modern life. Dvitiya dvai bhayam bhavati, fear indeed arises from duality. What causes fear? The Upaniṣadic tradition does not treat fear merely as a biological reflex or situational reaction, rather it locates fear in the very structure of divided consciousness. In philosophical terms, it arises the moment consciousness experiences itself as divided into self and others, knower and world, possessor and loss, desire and uncertainty, expectation and outcome. What do we fear? Do we fear our own self? No, it is caused because of the responses that we anticipate from others. So, wherever the self is dependent upon something external for completion, security or validation, fear becomes inevitable. If identity rests upon wealth, one fears loss. If it rests upon status, one fears humiliation. If it rests upon relationships, one fears abandonment. If it rests upon the body, one fears decay. The fear is not accidental, it is structurally produced by attachment to the second as the basis of selfhood. Modern anxiety often appears as fear of failure, fear of public judgment, fear of professional irrelevance or fear of uncertain futures. We all experience that. We are living in a world where all of us are afraid of being left out, being lagging behind, being outdated, being irrelevant. Yet beneath these lies the same Upaniṣadic structure. The self has outsourced stability to external markers such as grades, career outcomes, social media visibility, institutional approval or relational validation. Why this happens? This happens because we believe that the true markers of our self lie outside us. The Upaniṣadic analysis is that it moves fear from event level explanation to ontological diagnosis. The issue is not uncertainty alone, but the divided self that seeks certainty from the unstable. We have seen many people, they look for happiness outside when the happiness lies within. You might have heard about that. Kasturi kundali vasai mriga dhundhai banamahi. Well, the reality, the stability, it resides in us, but we try to seek it outside. Thus, emotional balance requires more than coping techniques. It requires reconfiguring the relationship between selfhood and outcome, so that uncertainty remains an event rather than becoming a threat to being. So, if you are strong enough, if you understand your capabilities, the temporary failures or problems will not be enough reasons to lose faith in yourself. You might always treat it as an event which is transient in nature and can be controlled or tamed or will pass with the passage of time. The deepest source of fear is not the uncertain world, but the divide itself that depends upon the world for its sense of being. If you are composed, if you understand yourself, you are confident of yourself and you have a unified self, probably you will not be affected by the outcomes that much. Now, what are those practices for emotional balance that are desirable? Emotional balance is not treated as a personality trait one either possesses or lacks, but as the result of systematic reconfiguration of consciousness, body, breath, memory and habit. So, Indian traditions recognize that emotions persist because they are not merely thoughts, they are embodied patterns sustained by breath rhythms, interpretive habits, relational memory and repeated modes of response. So, we do not teach them as one of relationship or chanchal bhava, we treat them as characteristic traits of our being. So, the disciplines offered by Indian traditions are so profound, dhyanas, not merely relaxation. It is the cultivation of witness consciousness. When we go in some kind of trance or meditate, we cultivate that witness consciousness in which we look at ourselves. Through that the feeling can be observed without immediate identification. So, Dhyāna, Prāṇāyāma, it works critically to the level of physiological rhythm, interrupting the breath patterns that often intensify panic, agitation and reactive speech. So, if you want to search for emotional balance, Dhyan will help control your fleeting emotions. It will develop your sthāyi bhava by controlling fleeting emotions. Pranayam, lot of people say when you suffer stage fear or have panic, better to go for some kind of pranayama, that is controlling of your breath. Take a few deep breath, inhale and exhale with some kind of control and you will feel much better. This next thing is Svādhyāya, that moves emotional life into reflective cognition, allowing the individual to interrogate recurring triggers, beliefs and narrative self constructions. Through Svādhyāya, you find out those reasons that affect your emotions, and any triggers that you identify, if you can control them, probably you will possess more sthāyi bhava than sanchari bhava. Satsang and meaningful dialogue introduce a relational corrective, reminding us that emotions are also socially conditioned and can be transformed through wiser conversational environments. You might have heard people say a man is known by the company he keeps. That means what kind of environment we are living in, what kind of talk is there, that also has effect on the kind of emotions that we will have. So, satsang, the company of great people, is equally important. Equally significant is the role of aesthetic and devotional disciplines. Music, poetry, mantra and rasa based artistic engagement do not merely express emotion, they refine it by giving form, distance and symbolic intelligibility to otherwise chaotic inner states. So, friends, whenever you are in a disturbed mental state, you listen to music, you attend a poetry session, you chant mantras, and you feel that inner turbulence is controlled, it subsides and make you much more stable, calm and composed. So, devotional centering and gratitude similarly reorient consciousness away from compulsive self reference toward a wider field of meaning, thereby loosening the egoic structures that magnify emotional suffering. And that is why these are the Indian ways through which a troubled emotional state may be regulated. In contemporary terms, this is why practices such as journaling, therapy, reflective pauses before response and mindful communication resonate so strongly with these older disciplines. Their function is not merely to feel better, but to interrupt the recursive circuits through which emotions become habitual identities. So, friends, we have seen how through these practices, through cultivation of the right guna, the sattvic guna rather than rajasic and tamasic, we can always cultivate better emotional balance that might lead to the strength of inner correct character and will make us much more resilient and composed even in the face of turbulent experiences. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I look forward to your company in the next class. Thank you very much.